Hello and welcome viewers. Today we will discuss about the concept of producers, consumers and decomposers. The organisms that make up the living parts of the ecosystem, that is the biotic community, are divisible into two major categories, namely autotrophs producers and heterotrophs consumers and decomposers. This division is based on the function of organisms and not on taxonomy. Autotrophs, the green plants and algae, and autotrophic bacteria, by capturing solar energy and utilizing the simple inorganic substances, manufacture food that is utilized by the heterotrophs which cannot manufacture their own food. Heterotrophs unpack the consumed food, mobilize and excrete some of the contents and reassemble the remainder into their own bodies. They in turn may be consumed, unpacked and reconstituted in a chain of events in which each consumer becomes in turn a resource for some other consumer. In every food chain, decomposers are very important because they act on dead organic matter and return nutrients and products to the ecosystem, so they act as recyclers of the nutrients. Living organisms and their non-living environment are inseparable, interrelated and interacting upon each other. Any unit that includes all of the organisms, that is the biotic community, in a given area interacting with the physical environment, so that a flow of energy leads to clearly defined trophic structures, biotic diversity and material cycles, that is the exchange of materials takes place within the ecosystem, is an ecological system or ecosystem. From the troph means nourishment standpoint, an ecosystem has two components. An autotrophic component, autotrophic means self-nourishing, in which fixation of light energy, use of simple inorganic substances and build up of complex substances predominate. And a heterotrophic component, heterotrophic means other nourishing, in which utilization, rearrangement and decomposition of complex materials predominate. Producers, consumers and decomposers can be discussed under two main headings, namely autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs are producers. Autotrophs, autos means self, trophin means to nourish, or the organisms which build up complex substances from simple inorganic substances with the help of light energy. This process is mainly carried out by green plants, including the photosynthetic bacteria. To some lesser extent, chemosynthetic microbes also contribute to the build-up of organic matter. They are producers in a food chain, such as plants on land or algae in water. They are able to make their own food and do not need a living energy or carbon source. Autotrophs can reduce carbon to make organic compounds. Autotrophs can be photoautotrophs or chemoautotrophs. Photoautotrophs convert radiant energy from sunlight, in case of green plants, into chemical energy in the form of reduced carbon, while as chemotrophic species simply utilize electron donors as a source of energy, whether it is from organic or inorganic sources. However, in case of autotrophs, these electron donors come from inorganic chemical sources. Chemoautotrophs are bacteria using carbon dioxide as a carbon source and energy derived from the oxidation of inorganic materials such as iron, sulfur, ammonia and nitrite. From the matter and energy transfer viewpoint, autotrophs are also known as producers. Producers are organisms that are able to prepare their own food by the process of photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process that converts solar energy into chemical forms of energy, which is used by biological systems for their sustenance. Photosynthesis is carried out by different organisms ranging from plants to bacteria. The best known form of photosynthesis is the one carried out by higher plants and algae, as well as by cyanobacteria and their relatives, which are responsible for a major part of photosynthesis in oceans. All these organisms convert carbon dioxide to organic material by reducing this gas to carbohydrates in a rather complex set of reactions. The grasses, shrubs and trees in a meadow are examples of producers. These types of producers are common in grasslands and forest ecosystems. Algae are common producers in estuaries and marine ecosystems. Energy relationships underlie ecological kinships in so many ways. The nature of the ecosystem is best studied by beginning with the influx of energy. Radiant energy in the form of sunlight is the ultimate and only significant source of energy for any ecosystem. It is used in the photosynthetic process, whereby carbon dioxide is assimilated into energy-rich carbon compounds. The organisms that perform this vital function are the producers. Typically, these are chlorophyll-bearing plants. The algae of a pond, the grasses of a field, the trees of a forest. Considerably less significance in most ecosystems are the purple bacteria. They also assimilate carbon dioxide from inorganic compounds with the energy of sunlight. Producers are called as converters or transducers, as they convert or transduce radiant energy into chemical form. The efficiency of the producers in adding energy to the ecosystem determines how robust the ecosystem will be. Efficient producers can enable an ecosystem to support secondary, tertiary or even quaternary consumers. Heterotrophs. Heterotrophs, heteros means other and trophin means to nourish, or the organisms whose nutritional needs are met by feeding on other organisms and are unable to prepare their own food like autotrophs. Heterotrophs eat ready-made complex organic food. From this they obtain energy for metabolism, atoms and molecules to build a new protoplasm or repair worn out parts, and ions, coenzymes and vitamins vital for chemical processes. Animals, fungi, most bacteria, many protists and a few plants cannot synthesize their organic molecules from inorganic ones. All heterotrophs except blood and gut parasite have to convert solid food into soluble compounds capable of being absorption or digestion. The heterotrophs are divisible into phagotrophs, phago means to eat, or macroconsumers, and microconsumers or saprotrophs, sapro means to decompose. Another useful two-way category subdivision for heterotrophs suggested by Vigert and Owens 1970. Biophages, organisms consuming other living organisms, and saprophages, organisms feeding on dead organic matter. The biophages include chiefly the animals that ingest other organisms or particulate organic matter, for example, snails that ingest organic particles. The saprotrophs chiefly including bacteria and fungi which break down complex dead protoplasm, absorb some of the decomposition products and release inorganic nutrients. They are also called as decomposers. The phagotrophs may be herbivores, ingesting plants, for example, goat, deer, etc., or carnivores, ingesting other animals, for example, tiger, lion, etc., or omnivores, ingesting both plants and animals, for example, bear, man, etc. Now, let us start classification of phagotrophs or macroconsumers. Consumers can be classified on the basis of feeding habits as well as position in food chain. On the basis of feeding habits, they can be categorized into three groups: herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. Herbivores are consumers that eat only producers. Since plants, trees, and shrubs make their own food, herbivores get energy from eating these producers. In a forest ecosystem, deer and rabbits are common herbivores. In a savanna ecosystem in Africa, zebras and elephants are common herbivores. Carnivores. Carnivores are consumers that eat only other animals. In marine ecosystems, sharks, walruses, seals, and octopuses are common carnivores. In land ecosystem, lions, wolves, hawks, and eagles are common carnivores. Some carnivores are called scavengers as they eat animals that are already dead. Most of the time, scavengers eat leftovers from other carnivores. One example of a scavenger is vulture. Omnivores. Omnivores are consumers that eat both plants and animals. Since they eat a variety of organisms and can easily adapt to changing environment. Pigs, bears, raccoons, and humans are examples of omnivores. Now let us talk about the classification of consumers. On the basis of position in food chain, they can be categorized into primary, secondary, tertiary, and top level consumers. Primary consumers, an animal that eats only producers. Secondary consumer, an animal that eats a herbivore. Tertiary consumer, a carnivore that eats other carnivores. Top level consumers or quaternary consumers, carnivores at the top of the food chain or food web. The energy stored in the producers by photosynthesis is subsequently synthesized into molecules that serve the nutritional requirements of the producer's own growth and metabolism. A portion of the primary production is consumed by herbivores, which in turn are consumed by carnivores. A primary consumer, or more commonly a herbivore, is a heterotroph that derives its nutrition directly from plants. A carnivore or secondary consumer is a heterotroph deriving its energy indirectly from producers by way of the herbivore. Some ecosystems contain tertiary consumers, carnivores that feed on other carnivores. Omnivores are consumers that derive their energy from both producers and herbivores. A simple example of this autotroph-heterotroph relationship is the reindeer-human food chain in Lapland. Energy captured by the photosynthesizing reindeer moss serves as a food base for reindeer and the later in turn for the Laplander. In this chain, the reindeer moss is the producer and is an autotroph. The reindeer and the Laplander are heterotrophs, the former a primary consumer or herbivore, the later a secondary consumer or carnivore. Producer, herbivore, carnivore relationship is the direction of energy movement through the ecosystem. It is unidirectional and non-cyclic. In part, we could reason this because plants do not consume animals. The explanation for the non-cyclic unidirectional flow of energy, however, is to be found in the energy losses that occur at each transfer along the chain and in the efficiency of energy utilization that occur within each link of the food chain. Thus, the movement of energy at each successive step is less and less, imposing an ultimate limit on the number of transfers. Hence, levels due to this reason, one-way flow of energy constitute a cardinal principle of ecosystems. Let us discuss about the decomposers or saprotrophs. Decomposers are the organisms which get energy by breaking down nutrients in dead organic matter. This group of organisms is collectively referred to as decomposers or reducers and chiefly consists of bacteria and fungi. For the most part, decomposers do not consume food in the ingestive manner like a herbivore or carnivore. They do so by absorption. Enzymes produced within their bodies are released into dead plant and animal material, and some of the degraded and digested products are then absorbed. Generally, in terrestrial ecosystems, bacteria act on animal tissue and fungi act on plant tissue. Decomposers break down the nutrients and produce some products such as water and carbon dioxide. These products are returned to the ecosystem for the use of other organisms. Decomposers are very important because they return nutrients and products to the ecosystem and act as recyclers of the nutrients. The micro-consumers or bacteria and fungi are relatively immobile with high rate of metabolism and turnover. Each population is short-lived and one is replaced by another continuously and rapidly. Hence, biomass is never large. They also display biochemical specialization. Hence, their significance cannot be assessed by counting and weighing them. As a byproduct of supplying their own growth and metabolism requirements, however, decomposers perform an invaluable service to the ecosystem, the mineralization of organic matter. Through their exoenzyme digestive activity, basic elements bound in the protoplasm are released to the environment and are thereby made available for reuse mainly by producers but also by other organisms. Carbon and nutrients in dead organic matter are broken down by a group of processes known as decomposition. This results in release of nutrients which can be reused for plant and microbial production and returns carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, where it can be used for photosynthesis. In the absence of decomposition, dead organic matter would accumulate in an ecosystem and nutrients and atmospheric carbon dioxide would be depleted. Approximately 90% of the terrestrial net primary productivity goes directly from plants to decomposers. Decomposition rates vary among ecosystems. The rate of decomposition is governed by three sets of factors: the physical environment, temperature, moisture and soil properties, the quantity and quality of the dead organic material available to decomposers, and the nature of the microbial community itself. Now, dear viewers, let us discuss about relationship between producers, consumers and decomposers and its importance. Producers funnel into the ecosystem the energy needed for its biological processes. Carbohydrates and other organic chemicals formed by the producers are consumed and utilized by the heterotrophs or consumers. First by the herbivores who eat the plants, the primary consumers. Then by the predators who eat the herbivores, the secondary, tertiary and so on consumers. But at each step, much energy is lost. Less than 10% of the energy stored in plants is converted to the herbivore mass. An ecosystem is made up of producers, consumers and decomposers. These organisms form a tightly knit web where each depends on the other to survive and thrive. The most important of these organisms are the producers, without whom the entire system would fail and there would be no life. Producers are the foundation of an ecosystem. Every organism depends on the producers directly or indirectly for survival. Consumers or heterotrophs cannot produce their own food and depend on outside sources for their energy and nutrients. Primary consumers or herbivores eat only plants. Their bodies absorb the nutrients from the plants and transform the stored sugars into energy. Secondary consumers or carnivores eat primary consumers and metabolize the proteins in their meat into energy. Decomposers such as scavengers, fungi and bacteria receive energy and nutrients from dead producers and consumers. They break down the dead organisms into their most basic chemical components. Many of these components such as nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium are vital to plant life and healthy plant growth. Producers do not just provide food for an ecosystem, they also release oxygen into the atmosphere as a byproduct of photosynthesis process. Oxygen is essential to the survival of animals. In turn, animals release carbon dioxide into the air, which is an essential element in the photosynthesis process. The primary function of biotic relationships is systematic transfer of energy from one organism to another. This energy flow drives the movement of vital nutrients throughout the ecosystem, ensuring that each member has what it needs to live, grow and thrive. In short, one group of organisms cannot survive in the absence of other for a long period of time. Life is possible only because of the relationship between different groups of organisms. Now, dear viewers, let us discuss about the role of producers, consumers and decomposers in an ecosystem. Producers or photosynthetic organisms capture solar energy and take in materials such as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, etc. and make food which is then passed on to the consumers. Consumers generally carry on a process of cellular respiration which release the energy necessary for their own life functions. Both the producers and the consumers die and produce waste products which are then passed on to the decomposers or saprophytes. Decomposers are mainly bacteria and fungi that break down the materials in the waste and dead bodies and recycle them back to the producers. Important thing is that materials are recycled but energy is not. For this reason, it is the solar energy that derives the entire cycle of life, which includes all the interactions and feeding relationships that we refer to as food web. The concept of this relationship is and should be a broad one. Its main function in ecological thought being to emphasize obligatory relationships, interdependence and causal relationships, that is the coupling of components to form functional units. Thus, it is possible only through this relationship that one-way transfer of energy and cyclic movement of nutrients takes place. If there would not have been any relationship between producers, consumers and decomposers, life would not have been possible on Earth. One of the universal features of all ecosystems, whether terrestrial, freshwater or marine, or whether man-engineered like agriculture, etc., is the interaction of the autotrophic and heterotrophic components. Very frequently, these functions and the organisms responsible for the processes are partially separated in space in that they are stratified one above the other. The space-time separation leads to a convenient classification of energy circuits into a grazing circuit, in which the term grazing refers to the direct consumption of living plants or plant parts, and an organic detritus circuit which involves the accumulation and decomposition of dead materials. As a general principle, we can point out that from the operational standpoint, living components of ecosystem are so interwoven into the fabric of nature that it is difficult to separate them. Most of the vital elements such as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus and so on are not only found inside and outside of the living organism, but they also remain in a constant state of flux between living and non-living components. Producers, consumers and decomposers are important for the sustenance of ecosystem, both as individual entities as well as interacting groups. Living systems cannot flourish without the exchange of matter and energy among biotic components themselves as well as with abiotic ones. Matter and energy exchange is possible only because of the different functional groups of organisms in an ecosystem. Hence, presence of one group of organisms is vital for the sustenance of other one, as no one can exist separately. Producers, consumers, and decomposers as separate groups constitute the structural dimension, while as the interacting groups constitute the functional dimension of the ecosystem. Dear viewers, with this we conclude today's topic entitled Producers, Consumers and Decomposers. Thank you for watching.